saw the logs of the web chats between people from the war room to each other, a lot of it made disturbing reading. Were you disturbed by it when you read that?
Firstly, a lot of that is bullshit. A lot of that's fake. Secondly...
You think that literally those logs are fake?
Absolutely. Secondly...
But the BBC verified them.
The BBC verified them, or they're the same people who verified the vaccine. Those people, they're liars, firstly. A lot of them are fake. Secondly, the
Were you disturbed by anything you read?
No, because none of it's real, firstly. Secondly, there's 4,000 members in the war room. Thirdly, the war room is about masculine personal development. We talk about fitness, making money, strength. We talk about very important things. There's 4,000 members inside. If you're telling me that amongst 4,000 members with 24-hour chats 7 days a week for the last 5 years, they've managed to find 2 guys talking locker room talk, and that somehow offends the world, then nobody understands how the world works. That's not why I was in jail. It's nothing to do with the war room. I was in jail because I spoke against power, because I told the truth about COVID, because I told the truth about the war in Ukraine, because I told the truth about all of these things.
I don't understand why people would want to put you in jail for giving your opinions about COVID or Ukraine. Why would they?
Why wouldn't they?
Well, why would they? Why would they say that Andrew Tate's opinion is so important on Ukraine that we have to put him in jail? I don't buy that.
Okay, because I was the most Googled man on the planet, and I had a huge affinity with the most troublesome demographic for the Matrix, which is the young masculine youth, the people who you need to die in wars, the people who you need to psyop into being slaves to build the roads while telling them that they're not allowed a point of view and they're not allowed an opinion on anything. And I was saying things which was going against the narrative. And the Matrix, the way it operates is it uses the MSM to purport lies, to inject slave programming into people's brains so that we live lives which are not good for us but are good for them. And I was sitting there unplugging it. Why would they sit there and say, we've put together this massive psyop, we're going to convince everybody to inject themselves with poison, and we're going to lock everyone in their houses, and it's all a lie, and we're going to let this one guy who everyone listens to...
Andrew, it wasn't all a lie.
Yes, it was.
It wasn't. There was a new novel coronavirus. Okay, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what the facts were, and you can then laugh at them if you wish.
Sure.
But there was a novel coronavirus, COVID-19. It was killing thousands of people a day.
Really?
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
Scary.
Yeah, and I know people who died.
Who doesn't? I know people who died before Corona.
Fine, I'm sure people died of lots of things, but it was killing exponentially thousands and thousands of people, and then vaccines were developed at very high speed, and they managed to save, in my estimation, millions of lives. You may not agree with that,
absolutely,
but those are facts as assumed by the body of scientific and medical experts in the world.
The body of scientific and medical experts, you mean the Matrix? I could get...
What is the Matrix?
The Matrix are a bunch of people who can come up with studies from the sky to say anything they want them to say, so they can use the MSM to purport garbage inside of people's minds. So you end up locked in your house, clapping for the NHS like a performing seal, injecting yourself with experimental poison for the 9th time. It's a lie. There was no reason to lock everyone in their house. More people died from missed cancer appointments than anyone ever died of COVID. People always got the sniffles before COVID, and they've always got it since. Let me ask you a question.
Hang on,
sir.
it wasn't.
Where is COVID gone?
It wasn't.
Diseases don't go away.
It wasn't.
Where's COVID gone?
It wasn't. Well, the COVID strains have got milder, as indeed flu did. Flu used to kill.
So it's gone away now.
Well, flu pandemic in about 100 years ago killed 50 to 100 million people, and it's got steadily milder over the decades since. This is normal medical science pathway for most pandemics, right? So on that, I mean, your sort of cast iron, it was all Matrix, MSM nonsense, is palpably untrue.
Well, I'll tell you why that's not untrue. Let me tell you my personal experience with COVID. I'm an extremely logical person. At the beginning, when everyone was dying, dropping dead in the streets in China, which I never saw, by the way, funny, and the Italian hospitals were full, English hospitals were never full, funny. Me and my brother sat there and said, if this disease is so deadly and can damage us as strong military-age males, then the world is over. So there's no point in hiding in our house. We decided to go to Sweden. On day one of COVID, day one when everyone still believed, we went to Sweden. Why does no one talk about the fact that Sweden was open the entire time? Why does no one talk about the fact they didn't have masks or lockdown or vaccines? My brother and I partied in nightclubs 7 days a week for 3 entire months while everyone in England was locked in their house.
Sweden actually had a number of restrictions.
Not when I was there. It was open.
Not as draconian as we had in the UK, and there are certainly legitimate questions to ask about the scale of our lockdowns. I think people panicked. They saw what was happening in Italy, which had the second best medical healthcare system in the world, and people were dying in massive numbers and the hospitals were overrun. So people may have panicked.
Did you hear about the guy who died in a motorcycle crash and it was a COVID death? Did you hear about that one?
Well, there was certain
Downing Street didn't seem very concerned with
there
COVID.
Was a long debate about people dying of COVID or with COVID. I know all that, but the bottom line for me, it is indisputable that COVID was a deadly pandemic that killed a lot of people. It turned out a lot of older people more than young people. but they didn't know that at the time, not for a long period. The vaccine saved millions of people's lives. There are legitimate questions about some of the boosters, about some of the side effects of the vaccines, as there are, by the way, with all vaccines. But the idea that COVID is some invention by the Matrix to suppress and control its people is for the birds, Andrew. It's for the birds.
It seems the birds and
I
I are friends.
don't think a smart guy like you actually believes that.
Of course, I
and that's
absolutely
one of my problems.
believe that.
One of my problems I have with you is that I think you are intelligent, but I think you also adopt positions that you know are going to get the anti-Matrix mob inflamed. And it's just these all-encompassing views you have. COVID was a load of nonsense. Vaccines are all dangerous and killing more people than they say.
Never said that. I said the COVID vaccine.
Well, COVID vaccine, well, you don't think they worked?
No, of course not, because the idea of
Of course
a vaccine,
they worked.
The word vaccine in and of itself is that you
They
get...
saved millions of lives. Do you regret the tone of that initial response to what happened?
My initial response was to the initial news stories. You will recall, I'm sure, that initially what we were informed was that there was a breakout from Gaza concentration camp, that approximately 1,500 people had broken out, and that about 50 people, that was the initial number that was given, approximately 50 Israelis were killed. The number gradually grew, went from 50, a couple of days later it went to 100, and I'm sure you'll remember the number didn't reach 1,400 until about 10 days later. Initially, it was reasonable, it was reasonable to assume that people had been killed in a firefight, which was not the case, at least not fully the case. So my initial reaction was to the initial news stories. By the third or fourth day, I was clearly compelled to rethink my initial statements and try to make sense of what was clearly a moral quandary. And at that point, I revised not revised, but I considered my judgment on the basis of the new information that was available.
Okay.
And my own sense, yes, go ahead.
I just want to, look, I've done a timeline for my own benefit based on what happened that day. We know the attacks began at 6:30 in the morning. We know that at 11:18 a.m., Israel confirmed, as you say, 40 dead, 700 injured. At 11:35, Benjamin Netanyahu said, we are at war. At 12:30 that day, at lunchtime, I tweeted horrifying and appalling scenes from Israel. This murderous, indiscriminate Hamas terror attack on Israeli people is shameful and indefensible. By 4:17, Israel said 100 were dead at least, 985 wounded. Civilian hostages have been taken. At 4 o'clock, a little later than that, around the same time, footage is released of the attack reporting that 3,000 bombs and firearms have been fired off by Hamas. Civilians have been killed, and so on. And yet at 6:30, and then again at 9:16, you were retweeting your initial Substack, and you then added at 9:16 that you felt the hostage situation was crocodile tears. So I would take issue with your statement that you thought it was only after 2 or 3 days that anyone had a clue about the scale of what had happened here. It was very obvious during that Saturday about the mounting scale of horror. And I just don't understand why someone as scholarly as you, as expert in this region, in this conflict as you are, why your response would be that for several days, one of glorifying in the in what you called heroic resistance, whereas mine, and I've always tried to be fair-minded about this conflict and reported it for CNN and tried to be fair and accurate as and when I've seen it, that I, at midday that day, I'm talking about a murderous, indiscriminate terror attack and horrifying and appalling scenes. I just don't believe that you weren't aware, with great respect, about the scale of what was going on.
Okay, Piers, let me begin by saying I want to have a civil conversation, and I'm going to do my darndest to remain faithful to the facts and faithful to truth. I'll do my darndest not to exaggerate. The first thing I have to say is I don't tweet. I've never been on Twitter. I have 3 young tech people who I send statements to, and then they make the decision where to place it on Substack, on Twitter, and so forth. Okay, I just want to clear that up. I made one statement on the first day on the basis of the information that was available to me. The information was 50 people had been killed. Now, my memory is, but I won't claim my memory is infallible, the numbers didn't start to grow until the next day.
That's not true.
As the numbers, okay.
It's just not true.
Piers.
Well, Professor, with respect.
Okay, I'm not going to.
It's not true.
Piers. Yeah, but you have to listen to what I say.
But you want me to believe you when you say you weren't aware of the scale of this for several days. I find that just, I'm incredulous. You want me to believe that?
Okay, Piers, I'm not going to force you to believe it, and I'm not going to even try to impose my will. I'm simply saying, as a factual matter, speaking for myself, I was not aware that the numbers had been beyond 50 when I made that statement.
I think the way I equate it is how perilous is it for mankind in our general mission focus, be that with our families or with the world at large. There are not too many distractions available to get us off course if we don't let there be. The concerns in the Middle East are, of course, very real and great. But with the principles intact that those in the world who believe in freedom, whether you call it democracy or something else, we're not given more to do than we're able to do. And I think it's just the micro stuff and the breaking down of each other in all of this is really the distraction that we should worry about. Obviously, that's manipulated by enemies. I never felt that, for example, President Putin's trip to Tehran was strictly about drones. And I do believe that there was an influence on what happened October 7th in Gaza, in Israel, that too was influenced by this. So these things have connections, and so to defeat those things or for freedom to triumph is to be able to maintain focus on both and the other issues of the day.
There's a fascinating moment in the movie. I'm going to come to the movie in a lot more depth a little later, but there's a fascinating moment about freedom where Zelensky reveals he came to America, I think, in the late 80s as an impressionable young man to see what freedom and democracy actually looked like. And it was that inspired him to want freedom of this kind for his own country.
Yes. Yeah, that really hit home with me because it was almost the inversion of that I was experiencing, having talked myself into believing that I had been living in a free country. But what does free mean? And free really has to include a sense of unity, community, and yes, diverse opinions, but dealt with in civil and productive ways for tomorrow and for the more long term. And when I got to Ukraine and I felt that so embedded in its current culture, I realized what I'd been missing, and I said that in the film. It really was at once incredibly tragic. Of course, the reasons what's forced them into this kind of high moment of incredible unity is devastating. And yet it's another opportunity for humankind to look at itself and say, what is it we really need so that we have a quality of life that we can share with each other.
Do you see parallels between what's happening in Israel and Gaza and the Ukraine-Russia war?
Well, of course, there are certain parallels. The wanton disregard for, and in fact, proactive attack on civilians, on children, on infrastructure. And the biggest parallel, I suppose, the one I think we could spend our time most productively focusing on is the way in which, and this extends to so much else, the way in which nuance is not allowed into the conversation. Now, what's not a parallel in the case of what's not nuanced at all in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, or rather Russia's criminal invasion of Ukraine, is that's a very unambiguous set of circumstances. It's a very clear black hat involved here, a black hat against all our human principles with Russia's horrible and misguided invasion, and all the murder, and all of the taking of children and re-educating of children to hate their parents and their country, and things we just shouldn't stand for as any single section of it. My sense is that, and I'm not an expert on the Middle East, but my sense is certainly that they're, with the horror of what Hamas has done, that to get to a productive result for Jews, for Israelis, for Arabs in Israel, for Arabs in Gaza and the West Bank, and around the Middle East, we might not like it, but it's going to take a very nuanced conversation, and the sooner we get to it, the better. And the more push there is, or resistance to that conversation, it will, the legacy will be that those who pushed against the nuanced conversation would have been the ones to have extended the problem.
He said, "The times I struck a woman, brackets, in passion, I never left a mark, no trace, hyper control, super control of a human animal. They love me still."
I've never heard that before in my life. I'm smiling, man, because I can imagine his voice saying it.
You can.
I can imagine his voice saying it. The only times I've struck a woman, in brackets, in passion. Have you ever struck a woman in passion, Piers?
No.
You haven't?
No.
Not a little spank?
Well,
Not once?
Let's keep this above board. But
I want to, Piers, but I'm saying, like, I understand how you're trying to phrase this.
No, I don't
and
understand.
Again, my father is dead and can't
no,
defend himself.
I'm not trying to phrase it in any way. I'm just curious what you think he meant by that.
I honestly don't know. I mean, keep in mind, my father died when I was 27, and that post was written a long time ago. I've never heard it before. I've never seen it before.
But what kind of father was he in terms of the values he instilled in you and Andrew?
Oh, he was a wonderful man, and he was a very protective man over his family and the people he cared about. I mean, they got divorced many, many years ago, but even with his dying breath, he would have jumped in to fight 10 men to defend my mother and her honor. That's the kind of guy he was, super protective and super, involved in everyone he loves life, even if he was far away. The phone calls were constant, the emails were constant, and he held us very accountable as young men.
Andrew tweeted last year, "My dad was a chess genius, CIA operative. My mother was a dinner lady. They had nothing in common. Dad said she fed you boys healthy meals every day, cleaned the house, and was largely quiet. I loved her very much. That's literally all men want."
Are you asking if that's an accurate description of my parents' relationship?
Yeah.
Perhaps, yeah. But my mother was a wonderful mother. See, I don't think.
But they split up.
Of course they did. But that does. Well,
so when he says that's literally all men want,
they split up way before I was old enough to understand marriage or sexual or male or female dynamics. By the way, so I can't even comment on their marriage. What I can comment on is how they were as parents. And what I will say is, I don't look back on my childhood raised in a council estate. On state benefits, I was free school lunches. I don't look back on that and think, oh, my mother was a terrible mother because we didn't have any money. Because I don't think it was my mother's job to, I guess, provide as much as my father was doing his best from the United States. But I will look back and say my mother was an absolutely wonderful mother. I had 3 square meals a day. She knew how to manage her finances, didn't smoke, didn't go out with her friends, made sure my clothes were always washed, knew how to mend things. She is.
How does she feel about the fact that both her boys are in this serious legal jeopardy?
Well, you have to understand, she's known us our entire lives, and you haven't. When I was 15, 16, 18, all my friends were selling drugs and breaking into cars. I was down at the kickboxing gym every single day. I would get into the kickboxing ring for 50 pounds after 8 weeks training, just because I found harmony in the discipline that sport gave me. I think kickboxing is massively, largely responsible for keeping me from ever doing anything illegal. Never tried a drug in my life. Never broken a law in my life.
Never broken any law?
I was speeding.
Right.
We're talking, I'm talking about serious crimes. And my mother's known that even at my most desperate and my most poor, I would come home to her and sleep on her couch for 6 months, as opposed to do anything illegal and try to find an honest, good way of, legal way at least, of making money. So
Is she worried about you, the situation you're in?
Well, she's worried about the situation, but she has no doubt in her mind that I haven't done any heinous things against women, especially for money, because it doesn't make sense that after going through what I've gone through and avoiding any legal problems, suddenly I'm worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and I decide that's the time to start trafficking.
When you look at this whole setup of the war room and the generals and I think Andrew said 4,000 people are members now.
Yes.
When I saw the web chat logs and so on, he says a lot of that isn't true. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see whether that's verified or not. But a lot of the language that's used seems to be that people are being encouraged to spend all this money to join a kind of cult where they are encouraged to treat women as second-class citizens.
Absolutely not true. One, I don't.
But that's what comes over in these.
One,
logs.
I believe the screenshots you've seen are fake.
All of them.
One, absolutely. Two, I would say I'm a member of the war room. The war room has nothing to do with me. I'm just a war room member like everybody else. And I find lots of great help within the war room, whenever I want to do business with somebody, if I want to transfer money to certain countries, if I want to, find somebody who has talents that I don't, to recruit people, to find people to work for me. That's what I use the war room for. I don't think any network in the world would exist where men sit around and just complain about women and try and treat women as second-class citizens. I mean, surely it would
Well, it's not complaining about them.
I wouldn't want to take part in that.
It's more like there's one of the running themes is to get the woman to tattoo your name on herself.
That's clearly not true. What you've read is fake, and it's made up by stupid journalists.
There's 12,000 pages of it.
There's 12,000 pages. Well, it doesn't matter. It's very easy to find some chat logs and enter little lines into it. I don't think that.
It's also very easy to say, yeah, a bit of it was done.
Well, here's the thing. If 4,000 people are talking across hundreds of different rooms 24 hours a day, right now, since the beginning of our interview, probably 300, 400, 500 messages have been sent inside of the war room. I can't tell you exactly what everyone has said over the last 4 years and what they haven't said.